I'm Brielle Morgan, 32, and I just discovered my entire life was built on a lie. 3 months ago at our annual family Thanksgiving dinner, my older sister Vanessa spat words that shattered my world. Go find another table, adopted kids aren't allowed. The casual cruelty was shocking enough, but the revelation, that was the real earthquake. My parents' faces confirmed what I'd never suspected: I wasn't biologically theirs. What followed was a revenge plan that would change our family forever. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into this family bombshell, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever dealt with family secrets or betrayal, this story might hit close to home. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you won't want to miss how karma eventually comes full circle in this family revenge drama. For 32 years, I believed I was a Morgan through and through. Growing up in our suburban Boston home, I never questioned my place in the family. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Morgan, were pillars of the community. Dad, a respected cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. Mom, the head of the local historical society. My sister Vanessa, 2 years older, was the golden child valedictorian captain of the debate team, and now a successful corporate attorney. I was the artistic one, quieter but loved all the same. Or so I thought. Our family photos lined the hallway walls, matching outfits at Disney World, awkward school pictures, graduation ceremonies. In every image, I saw the same dark brown hair and hazel eyes that I associated with being a Morgan. The family resemblance seemed obvious to me, with our shared high cheekbones and dimpled smiles. No one ever suggested otherwise, not neighbors, not relatives, not even my overly honest grandmother, who never hesitated to point out when I'd gained weight. My relationship with Vanessa had always been complex. As children, we shared secrets and clothes, built blanket forts together, and defended each other against neighborhood bullies. But something shifted during our teen years. Vanessa became more competitive, more guarded. Small comments became barbed, little kindnesses disappeared. "You're lucky, Mom and Dad are so nice to you," she'd say. Or, "You don't really fit in with the rest of us, do you?" I chalked it up to sibling rivalry, never imagining there was a devastating truth behind her words. Our parents never treated us differently, at least not in ways I could detect. They attended both our recitals and games with equal enthusiasm. They helped fund my art studio just as they had paid for Vanessa's law school. Family vacations, holiday traditions, Sunday dinners, all painted the picture of a perfectly normal, loving American family. After college, I built a successful career as an illustrator for children's books. My work allowed me to buy a small but charming apartment just 15 minutes from my parents' home. We still gathered for Sunday dinners, celebrated birthdays together, and called each other almost daily. Vanessa had moved to New York for a few years, but recently returned to Boston for a prestigious position at a law firm. Her homecoming meant our family was complete again, though her competitive nature had only intensified. The night before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, I'd spoken to my mother on the phone. She seemed tense, distracted. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I'd asked. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied with forced cheerfulness. "Just finalizing the dinner preparations. You know how I get before the holidays." I didn't think much of it. Mom was a perfectionist about holiday gatherings, and this year we were hosting extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. I offered to come early to help, but she insisted everything was under control. If only I'd pushed harder, maybe I would have been prepared for what was coming. Maybe I would have detected the slight tremor in her voice, the hesitation before she said goodnight. The signs were there: Vanessa's increasingly hostile text messages that week, Dad's unusual silence when I'd stopped by to drop off a pie the day before, the hushed conversation I'd interrupted between my parents in the kitchen. But I saw what I wanted to see: a normal family preparing for a traditional Thanksgiving. I had no idea that by the end of the next day, that image would be shattered beyond repair, and I would be questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and the people who raised me. As I laid out my outfit for Thanksgiving dinner that night, a burgundy sweater dress my mother had complimented before, I was blissfully unaware that in less than 24 hours, I would be standing in the middle of our dining room, surrounded by stunned relatives as my sister's cruel words exposed a 32-year secret that would set in motion a chain of events none of us could have predicted. The Morgan family facade was perfect, polished, and completely false, and it was about to come crashing down around all of us. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. I drove to my parents' house with a homemade pumpkin cheesecake on the passenger seat, and excitement in my heart. Family gatherings had always been a source of comfort and joy for me, especially Thanksgiving with its traditions and warmth. The driveway was already filled with cars when I arrived: Aunt Susan's station wagon, Uncle Paul's truck, cousins' vehicles I didn't recognize. The house glowed with golden light against the darkening afternoon sky. When I entered, the familiar scent of roasting turkey and Mom's signature sage stuffing enveloped me. Relatives milled about in the living room, drinks in hand, catching up on a year's worth of news. Dad stood by the fireplace, looking uncharacteristically anxious, while Mom fluttered between the kitchen and dining room, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Brielle," finally, Vanessa's voice carried across the room. She approached with a glass of wine in her hand, her designer outfit immaculate as always. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us." There was an edge to her voice sharper than her usual competitiveness. "Traffic was heavy," I explained, kissing her cheek. She stiffened slightly at the contact. "Is everything okay?" "Perfect," she replied, her smile tight. "Everything's just perfect." Dinner began normally enough. 20 of us squeezed around the extended dining table and the adjacent card table set up for the younger cousins. Mom's turkey was golden brown, the sides abundant and steaming. Dad said grace, his voice wavering slightly when he mentioned family bonds. I should have noticed something was wrong, but I was distracted by Aunt Susan asking about my latest illustration project. It happened during dessert. I was serving slices of my cheesecake when Vanessa clinked her glass for attention. My parents exchanged a panicked look. "I'd like to make a toast," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying an unusual intensity. "To family, to blood, to truth." "Vanessa, please," Mom whispered, but my sister continued. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what makes a Morgan," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "What qualities are passed down through our bloodline? Intelligence, ambition, our characteristic dimples." The table had gone quiet. I felt a chill run down my spine. "It's fascinating, isn't it? Nature versus nurture." Vanessa swirled her wine. "For example, I've always wondered why Brielle is so different from the rest of us. So artistic. So content with mediocrity." "That's enough," Dad interrupted, but Vanessa was unstoppable now. "Did you ever wonder, Brielle, did you ever look in the mirror and think something wasn't quite right, that maybe you didn't belong?" "Vanessa, stop this right now, Mom," pleaded, her face drained of color. Why hasn't she waited long enough for the truth? 32 years of lies seems excessive even by our family's standards. I stood frozen, the cheesecake knife still in my hand. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa's eyes glittered with malice. "Go find another table. Adopted kids aren't allowed." "That's what Grandma Morgan used to say, right, Mom? Wasn't that her charming philosophy? Blood relatives only." The room spun around me. I'm not adopted." "Oh, it's much better than that," Vanessa laughed without humor. "Tell her, Mom. Tell her who she really is." All eyes turned to my mother, who looked as though she might faint. Dad moved to her side, his arm around her shoulders protectively. "Eleanor, don't," he warned, but Mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You're not adopted, Brielle," she said softly. "Not technically. You're my biological daughter. But Richard is not your father." The knife slipped from my fingers, clattering against the china plate. What your biological father was my college boyfriend, Mom, continued, her voice barely audible. We had a brief reconciliation during a rough patch in my marriage. Richard and I worked things out, and when I discovered I was pregnant, he agreed to raise you as his own. Dad, or the man I'd always called Dad, looked at me with anguish in his eyes. You've always been my daughter, in every way that matters, Brielle. We were going to tell you when you were older, Mom sobbed. But the right time never came, and then years passed, and we just couldn't find the words. I found the words, Vanessa said coldly. And I found the letters from your real father too, Mom. The ones you kept hidden in that old hat box in the attic. Very romantic. Very inappropriate for a married woman. The dining room erupted in shocked murmurs and uncomfortable shifting. Aunt Susan put her arm around my shoulders, but I shrugged it off, feeling suffocated. Who knows? I managed to ask. Who else knew about this? Just us, Dad said. And Vanessa, she found out last month when she was helping your mother clean out the attic. I've known we weren't full sisters my entire life, Vanessa corrected him. Grandma Morgan told me when I was 7. That girl's not real family, she said. I just didn't have proof until I found the letters. 32 years of memories reorganized themselves in my mind. The slight differences in how Grandma Morgan had treated us. The whispered arguments between my parents that would stop when I entered a room. The family medical history forms where certain questions were always answered vaguely. Who is he? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. My biological father, Mom, couldn't meet my eyes. His name is Daniel Westbrook. He was an architecture student. He never knew about you. He moved to California after graduation. I haven't had any contact with him since before you were born. This is why you've always been the odd one out, Vanessa said, satisfaction evident in her tone. Not really a Morgan. Just a mistake they covered up. That's enough, Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Brielle is my daughter. She has always been my daughter. But I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room was closing in on me, the faces of my relatives, or were they even my relatives, blurring together. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen and out the back door into the cold November night. Behind me I could hear the chaos erupting, Mom's sobs, Dad's raised voice, Aunt Susan calling my name. But all I could focus on was the thundering in my ears, and the sickening realization that my entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies. The days following Thanksgiving blurred together in a haze of disbelief and pain. I returned to my apartment that night and shut off my phone, unable to face any more revelations or apologies. Sleep eluded me as I paced my living room, examining old family photos with new critical eyes. Had I deliberately been posed to stand next to Mom in group shots to emphasize our shared features rather than the differences between me and the man I'd called Dad? Were the similarities I'd seen with Richard Morgan just wishful thinking or careful presentation? When I finally turned my phone back on 3 days later, I had 37 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Mom had called 18 times, Dad 12. Even Vanessa had called twice, though I doubted she was calling to apologize. The voicemails ranged from tearful pleas to careful explanations, but none could erase the fundamental betrayal I felt. I listened to one from Dad Richard that broke me all over again. Brielle, please call us. You are my daughter. From the moment I held you in the hospital, you were mine. Biology doesn't make a father, love does. And I have loved you every single day of your life. His voice cracked with emotion, and despite my anger, I felt a corresponding crack in the wall I'd erected around my heart. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Work provided a welcome distraction. I threw myself into a new illustration project, grateful that my home studio allowed me to avoid human interaction. The children's book was about a young fox discovering he was actually a wolf cub. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured my confusion and pain into the artwork, creating some of the most emotionally resonant pieces of my career. A week after Thanksgiving, I finally agreed to meet with my mother at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by guilt and worry. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been sleeping as poorly as I had. "I don't know where to begin," she said, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. "The beginning would be nice," I replied, struggling to keep the bitterness from my voice. 32 years ago, she nodded, taking a deep breath. Richard and I had been married for 4 years. Things were difficult. He was finishing his medical residency, working 100-hour weeks. I was lonely. During a particularly bad fight, I told him I wanted a separation. "And you went running back to an old boyfriend?" I couldn't help the judgment in my tone. "It wasn't like that," Mom defended weakly. "Daniel was in town for a conference. We ran into each other at a gallery opening. He was familiar, comforting. It was just one weekend, Brielle. A mistake I've regretted and treasured in equal measure because it gave me you." "What happened when you found out you were pregnant?" I told Richard the truth immediately. We'd reconciled by then, but I couldn't lie about something so important. He was hurt, devastated really, but he said he wanted to make our marriage work. He said if I wanted to keep the baby, he would raise you as his own. "And my biological father, Daniel, he never knew." Mom shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He had moved to San Francisco by then. He was engaged to someone else. I made the decision to keep that door closed." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said quietly. "Not just yours anyway." "I know that now," she admitted. "But at the time, it seemed the cleanest solution for everyone. Richard would be your father in every way that mattered. Daniel wouldn't have his life complicated by a child from a brief affair. And you would have a stable, loving family. Built on a lie. Built on love," she countered. "Richard has never, not once, treated you as anything less than his daughter. He coached your soccer team, checked under your bed for monsters, walked you down the aisle at your wedding. Biology didn't matter to him. But it mattered to Vanessa," I pointed out, "and apparently to Grandma Morgan." Mom's expression hardened slightly. "Martha, your grandmother was from a different generation. She never said anything directly to us, but she must have made comments to Vanessa. I should have recognized the signs earlier, protected you better from her prejudice. And Vanessa, why did she wait until now to drop this bomb? She's always been competitive with you, jealous even. Richard has always had a special softness for you, his artistic daughter, so different from him. I think Vanessa resented that. When she found the letters last month, I begged her to let us tell you privately, but she..." Mom's voice broke. "She wanted to hurt you. To hurt all of us, really." We talked for 2 hours, my anger gradually giving way to a complex grief, not just for the truth I'd never known, but for the decades of secrecy that had poisoned our family from within. By the time we parted, I'd agreed to meet with Richard the following day. Not to forgive necessarily, but to listen. That night I lay awake staring at my ceiling, contemplating the fragments of my identity. Was I still Brielle Morgan? Was I somehow Brielle Westbrook too? Did it matter? I thought of the projects I'd worked on, the relationships I'd built, the achievements I'd earned. None of those things changed because of my genetic makeup. And yet everything had changed. With sudden determination, I opened my laptop and typed Daniel Westbrook Architect California into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared. But one caught my eye immediately, a profile of a prominent sustainable design architect in San Francisco. The man in the photo was in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and a thoughtful expression, and he had my eyes. Exactly my eyes. My finger hovered over the keyboard as I contemplated my next move. Part of me wanted to book a flight to San Francisco immediately to confront this stranger whose DNA I carried. Another part wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend I'd never seen his face. Instead, I created a folder on my desktop labeled Biological Father and saved the article there. A future possibility, but not an immediate necessity. The next day's meeting with Richard was even harder than the one with my mother. He brought photo albums I'd never seen before, pictures of him holding me in the hospital, feeding me my first solid food, teaching me to ride a bike. "I've never thought of you as anything but my daughter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not for one single day. I believed him. That was the hardest part, reconciling my anger over the deception with the undeniable evidence of his love for me throughout my life. We parted with a tentative hug and a promise to keep talking to find a way forward. Vanessa was another matter entirely. She hadn't reached out after her initial calls, and I wasn't ready to face her malice again. Her deliberate cruelty at Thanksgiving had revealed something ugly about her character, something that couldn't be explained away by childhood jealousy or resentment. As November turned to December, I began the slow process of reconstructing my sense of self. I was still Brielle Morgan, illustrator, daughter, friend, but I was also someone new, a woman with questions, with an unexplored heritage, with a righteous anger that was gradually transforming into something else. Something like resolve. One thing had become crystal clear in the midst of all this upheaval: the power of truth. And as I considered Vanessa's smug face at Thanksgiving dinner, the decades of snide comments suddenly contextualized. A plan began to form in my mind. If my sister valued brutal honesty so highly, perhaps it was time she experienced some of her own. December passed in a haze of tense family interactions and forced holiday cheer. I attended the Morgan family Christmas dinner out of respect for my father, because despite everything, Richard Morgan was still my dad, but the easy warmth of previous gatherings had vanished. Vanessa maintained a cool distance, clearly disappointed that her grand revelation hadn't completely destroyed the family as she'd hoped. Mom moved around with the careful movements of someone navigating a minefield, while Dad tried too hard to make everything seem normal. But something was shifting inside me. The initial shock and hurt were giving way to a determined curiosity. Who was I really, and more importantly, what did Vanessa's cruelty reveal about her? I'd spent my life believing we were sisters with a normal dose of sibling rivalry, but her calculated public humiliation suggested something far more sinister. My professional training as an illustrator had taught me to observe, to notice details others might miss. And now I turned those skills toward my family, particularly Vanessa. Why had she kept this secret for so many years, only to reveal it in the most devastating way possible? What did she gain from my pain? The answers, I suspected, lay in understanding who Vanessa really was beneath her perfect exterior. In early January, I began what I later called my sister study. I created a timeline of significant events in our relationship, noting patterns I'd previously dismissed. Vanessa's achievements always needed to overshadow mine. When I won a regional art competition in high school, she suddenly announced she was applying to Harvard Law instead of her original choice. When I got engaged to my college boyfriend, a relationship that ultimately ended before marriage, she introduced us to her new doctor boyfriend at the celebration dinner. It was never enough for her to succeed. She needed me to feel less than. But there was something else, something that had always bothered me subconsciously. Vanessa's life seemed too perfect, too carefully curated. Her social media showed a flawless existence, prestigious career, luxury vacations, influential friends. Yet I'd occasionally glimpsed cracks in the facade, unexplained absences from family events, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when someone entered the room, inconsistencies in her stories about work trips. One snowy afternoon in mid-January, I visited my parents' house to help Mom organize old photos, a peacemaking gesture that doubled as research for my growing investigation. In the dusty attic, surrounded by boxes of memorabilia, I made my first significant discovery. "What's this?" I asked, pulling out a stack of unopened mail addressed to Vanessa at our parents' address. Mom glanced over. Oh, Vanessa still has some financial statements sent here. She says it's more secure than her apartment building's mailbox. I nodded, but something about the envelopes caught my attention. They weren't from prestigious financial institutions, as I would have expected for my sister's investments. Instead, they bore the logos of payday loan companies, debt consolidation services, and collection agencies. Later that day, when Mom went to prepare lunch, I quickly photographed the envelopes with my phone. It wasn't much, but it was a thread I could pull. That thread led me to the county courthouse records, which were public and searchable online. A simple query with Vanessa's name revealed something shocking. My perfect successful sister had filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago, right before moving back to Boston from New York. The prestigious job she'd claimed was bringing her home. It didn't exist. She'd been working as a contract attorney, piecing together temporary gigs while living in our parents' guest house, a fact they had hidden from me, presumably at Vanessa's insistence. The bankruptcy filing told a story of catastrophic financial mismanagement, luxury purchases, gambling debts, high-interest loans. Vanessa, the golden child who had lectured me about my impractical career choice, was financially ruined. And no one had told me. Hey everyone watching, have you ever discovered a shocking family secret that changed how you saw someone? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying this twisted family saga, please hit that like button and subscribe to catch the next part where things get even more intense. Trust me, you won't believe where this revenge story goes next. As I dug deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. Vanessa claimed to have graduated at the top of her class at Harvard Law, but alumni records showed she'd been merely in the upper third. Impressive, but not the stellar performance she'd always boasted about. The prestigious law firm she claimed to have worked for in New York had no record of her employment beyond a summer internship. Her designer wardrobe, I discovered through a chance conversation with Aunt Susan, consisted largely of rented pieces and careful knockoffs. My sister, I realized with growing amazement, was a facade. A carefully constructed image of success with nothing substantive behind it. And I began to understand. Vanessa had exposed my parentage, not out of some twisted sense of honesty, but to deflect attention from her own faltering charade. If everyone was focused on my identity crisis, no one would notice that she was barely holding her life together. By February, I had compiled a substantial dossier on the real Vanessa Morgan. But information alone wasn't enough. The question remained, what was I going to do with it? I considered my options carefully. Public humiliation had been Vanessa's weapon of choice, and I could easily return the favor. A family dinner revelation of my own would provide a certain poetic justice. But as I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of my sister's failures and deceptions, I realized something important. I didn't want to be like Vanessa. I didn't want cruelty to be my legacy in this family. What I wanted was honesty. Real, complete honesty that would allow us all to move forward, either together or apart, but based on truth rather than convenient fictions. I also wanted something else, something I was almost ashamed to admit even to myself. I wanted to know my biological father. The man whose eyes I had inherited, whose genetic material had combined with my mother's to create me. Daniel Westbrook was no longer just a name or a face on a website. He was a missing piece of my identity puzzle, and I was determined to find him. This realization crystallized my plan. I would confront Vanessa privately, lay out everything I had discovered, and offer her a choice. She could come clean to our parents about her financial and professional situation voluntarily, or I would do it for her. And in exchange for my discretion in how this information came to light, she would help me locate and contact Daniel Westbrook. It was manipulation, yes, but it was also an opportunity for genuine change. Vanessa could finally stop living a lie, and I could explore the other half of my heritage without causing our parents, both of our parents, more pain than necessary. I set the plan in motion on a cold February evening, inviting Vanessa to my apartment under the pretense of wanting to clear the air between us. She arrived looking immaculate as always, her expression, a carefully arranged mask of reluctant sisterly duty. "I can't stay long," she announced, not removing her coat. "I have a client dinner at 8. "No, you don't," I replied calmly, gesturing to the dining table where I'd arranged printouts of her bankruptcy, filing the collection notices, and other evidence I'd gathered. "You're working at Starbucks tonight. The one on Newbury Street. The late shift, if I'm not mistaken." Her face drained of color so rapidly I thought she might faint. "How did you—" "Please sit down," I said, pulling out a chair. "We have a lot to talk about, sister." The confrontation that followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Vanessa cycled through denial, anger, and finally a breakdown that revealed the immense pressure she'd felt her entire life to be the perfect daughter, to compensate for what she'd always seen as my questionable status in family. "Grandma told me you weren't really a Morgan," she sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "She said I had to be twice as good, twice as perfect, to make up for Dad accepting you. Do you have any idea what that's like? To carry an entire family's reputation on your shoulders?" Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy. That was cruel of her to put on a child. "But it doesn't excuse what you did at Thanksgiving, Vanessa." She wiped her eyes, composure gradually returning. "What do you want from me, money? I obviously don't have any. I want the truth, all of it. And I want your help finding Daniel Westbrook." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You want to meet him, your real father, my biological father," I corrected. "Richard Morgan is my real father in every way that matters. But yes, I want to meet Daniel. I have questions only he can answer. Mom will be devastated. Mom lied to me for 32 years. She'll survive my curiosity." I leaned forward. "Here's the deal, you come clean to Mom and Dad about your financial situation, your job, everything. No more lies. And you help me track down Daniel without causing them unnecessary pain. In return, I'll never reveal that you've been deliberately sabotaging my relationship with them since we were children." "I never save it," I interrupted. "I've read your diary from high school. The one where you detailed your plans to make sure I never felt fully accepted. It's quite illuminating." It was a bluff I'd found, no such diary, but the flash of guilt in Vanessa's eyes told me I'd hit close to the truth. After a long silence, she nodded. "Fine, I'll help you. But not because you're blackmailing me. Because you're right, we can't keep living like this." As she left that evening, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't the closure I'd imagined when I began my investigation, but it was a beginning, a first step toward a more honest relationship with my sister and with myself. What I didn't realize was that our conversation had set in motion events far beyond my careful planning. Vanessa would honor our agreement, yes, but in a way I could never have anticipated. And my search for Daniel Westbrook would reveal secrets that would shake the foundation of the Morgan family once again. March arrived with unexpected warmth, as if the world were thawing along with the ice around my heart. True to her word, Vanessa had come clean to our parents about her financial and professional situation. The confession happened during a Sunday dinner. I'd deliberately skipped giving her the privacy to tell her truth without my watchful eyes. From the tearful phone call I received from Mom afterward, it was clear the revelation had been both shocking and in some ways a relief. The perfect daughter's perfect life had been exhausting for everyone to maintain. "We just want her to be happy," Mom told me, her voice ragged from crying. "I don't care if she's a barista or a Supreme Court justice. I just want my girls to be happy." There was irony there, of course. The decades spent preserving the fiction of our perfect nuclear family had brought none of us happiness. But I kept that observation to myself, focusing instead on the progress we were making toward honesty. Vanessa, meanwhile, had thrown herself into helping me locate Daniel Westbrook with surprising enthusiasm. Perhaps having unburdened herself of her own secrets had lightened something in her, or perhaps she was simply transferring her competitive nature to a new challenge. Either way, her legal research skills proved invaluable. "He's definitely in San Francisco," she confirmed, dropping a folder on my coffee table during one of our newly established weekly meetings. "Founding partner at Westbrook Sustainable Design. Married to his college sweetheart Claire, not mom, obviously a different college sweetheart, with 2 children both in their 20s. I opened the folder to find printouts of Daniel's company website, social media profiles, and recent press about an award-winning green building he'd designed in Oakland. "Does he know about me?" I asked the question that had been haunting me for months. Vanessa shook her head. "Not as far as I can tell. Mom was telling the truth about that part at least. But here's where it gets interesting." She pointed to a particular page in the folder. "He's coming to Boston next month. Giving a lecture at MIT on sustainable urban planning." My heart raced. "Next month, April 15th. I've already reserved you a seat at the lecture." Vanessa gave me a tentative smile, the first genuine one I could remember receiving from her in years. "I thought you might want to see him in person before deciding whether to make contact." I stared at her, trying to reconcile this helpful, thoughtful person with the sister who had so callously exposed my parentage at Thanksgiving. "Why are you doing this, Vanessa? Really?" She was quiet for a long moment, examining her perfectly manicured nails. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "Because I owe you. Because I've been horrible to you our entire lives for something that was never your fault. And because—" She hesitated. "Because despite everything, you're still my sister. Half-sister, whatever. Your family." I wasn't ready to forgive her, not completely, but I recognized the olive branch for what it was. "Thank you," I said simply. The weeks leading up to Daniel's lecture passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I researched everything about him, from his architectural philosophy to his hobbies, sailing and chess, according to an alumni magazine profile. I rehearsed what I might say if I decided to approach him after the lecture. I debated whether to tell my parents about my plans, ultimately deciding to wait until after I'd seen him. One emotional family drama at a time seemed wise. April 15th arrived cold and rainy, a typical New England spring day. I dressed carefully in a professional but artistic outfit: dark jeans, a structured blazer over a silk blouse, and the turquoise necklace that always garnered compliments. I wanted to look put together but creative, to reflect the career I'd built and the person I'd become, without any input from Daniel Westbrook. Vanessa met me outside the MIT auditorium, her own outfit understated for once. "Ready?" she asked, handing me a ticket. I nodded, though my stomach was twisted in knots. "As I'll ever be." The lecture hall was packed with architecture students and professionals. We found seats near the back, giving me a clear view of the podium, while maintaining enough distance to feel safe anonymous. When Daniel walked on stage, I gasped audibly. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable: the same eye shape, the same way of tilting his head while considering a question, even the gesture he made with his hands while emphasizing a point mirrored my own unconscious habits. "Are you okay?" Vanessa whispered, squeezing my arm. I nodded, unable to speak, my eyes fixed on the man whose DNA I carried. Daniel was tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same hazel eyes I saw every morning in my mirror. His presentation was engaging, passionate, occasionally funny, all qualities I'd been told I possessed as well. Was that genetics or coincidence? Nature or nurture? The questions I'd been wrestling with for months intensified as I watched him move confidently across the stage. After the lecture ended and the applause died down, students surged forward to ask questions. Vanessa turned to me. "Do you want to go down there? I can create a distraction if you need a private moment." I shook my head, suddenly certain. "Not yet. I need to process this first." Seeing him in person had made everything more real, more overwhelming. I wasn't prepared to introduce myself as his unknown daughter in a crowded university auditorium. As we left, I noticed a flyer advertising a reception following the lecture at a nearby hotel. There, I said, pointing, "That would be better. More private but still public enough to feel safe." Vanessa nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Want me to come with you?" "No," I decided. "This is something I need to do alone." 2 hours later, I stood in the corner of an elegant hotel ballroom, watching Daniel Westbrook chat with admirers from behind the rim of my sparkling water glass. I'd changed into a dress, nothing too formal, but something that made me feel confident. Vanessa had offered to do my makeup, a small sisterly gesture that touched me more than I let on. I waited until the crowd around him thinned, rehearsing my opening line silently. Finally, seeing him momentarily alone by the hors d'oeuvres table, I took a deep breath and approached. "Mr. Westbrook, I really enjoyed your lecture. Your perspective on integrating natural elements into urban spaces was fascinating." He turned, smiling warmly. "Thank you. Are you a student or a practitioner?" "Neither, actually. I'm an illustrator, children's books mostly." "An artist, excellent. We need more artistic perspectives in architectural discussions." He extended his hand. "Daniel Westbrook." "Brielle Morgan," I replied, shaking his hand, and watching carefully for any reaction to my name. There was none. No flicker of recognition, no sudden connection to a long-ago romance with Eleanor Morgan, just friendly interest from a stranger. We chatted about his projects, about my illustrations, about Boston's architectural heritage. He was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in my opinions. I found myself relaxing, despite the surreal nature of the situation. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's something familiar about you. Have we met before?" My heart pounded. "No, I don't think so. But actually, there might be a connection you're unaware of. Could we speak privately for a moment?" Curiosity crossed his face. "Of course." He guided me to a quieter corner of the room. I had planned a careful, measured approach to revealing the truth, but standing there looking into eyes so similar to my own, my prepared speech evaporated. "My mother is Eleanor Morgan," I said simply. "She knew you in college. And, about 33 years ago." His brow furrowed in concentration, then cleared in recognition. "Ellie, from BU. My goodness, that's a name I haven't heard in years. How is she?" "She's well. She's been married to Richard Morgan for almost 40 years now." "Good for her," he nodded, still seemingly oblivious to the bombshell I was about to drop. "Richard," he was that the medical student she started dating after we broke up? "Yes," I confirmed, my mouth dry. "But there's something you should know. Something she never told you." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Westbrook Daniel, according to my mother, you're my biological father." The color drained from Daniel's face. He reached for the wall to steady himself, eyes wide with shock as they searched my features with new intensity. That's not possible," he finally managed, his voice barely audible. "I understand this is a shock," I said, wishing I'd chosen a more private location for this conversation. "It was for me too when I found out at Thanksgiving." "No, you don't understand," Daniel shook his head emphatically. "It's not just shocking, it's impossible. Medically impossible." Now it was my turn to be confused. "What do you mean?" He glanced around the crowded reception, then made a decision. "Not here. Please, can we go somewhere private to talk?" 20 minutes later, we were seated in a quiet corner of the hotel's restaurant, untouched coffee cups between us. Daniel had texted his wife explaining he'd be late, returning to their hotel across town. I'd texted Vanessa, who was waiting in the lobby, as moral support. "I had mumps in my freshman year of college," Daniel explained, his hands wrapped tightly around his cup. "A severe case. It left me sterile. The doctors were absolutely certain I couldn't father children. Ever. But my mother. I began, then stopped, a horrible realization dawning. She lied. Again. Daniel nodded grimly. She must have. I'm sorry, Brielle. I can't possibly be your biological father. My mind raced. If Daniel wasn't my biological father, then who was? And why would Mom specifically name him a man who couldn't possibly contradict her because he didn't know I existed? Unless. When exactly did you have mumps? I asked. Fall semester freshman year. September 1989. I did the quick math. And when did you date my mother? We were together junior and senior year, so that would have been 91 to 93. We broke up after graduation when I moved to California. I was born in early 1993. The timeline fit with Mom's story about a reconciliation during a rough patch in her marriage. But if Daniel couldn't father children, did my mother know? About the mumps, I mean. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. I was always upfront about it with serious girlfriends. Ellie and I actually discussed adoption once, thinking very far ahead. She seemed completely accepting of the idea at the time. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture even more disturbing than the one I'd been grappling with for months. She deliberately named someone who couldn't possibly come forward to dispute her story. I said more to myself than to Daniel. Someone who lived across the country and wasn't connected to their social circle anymore. But why would she need such an elaborate lie? Daniel asked, genuinely confused. If she had an affair, why not just admit it was with someone else? A sickening thought occurred to me. Unless it wasn't a random affair. Unless it was someone Dad Richard would never forgive her for being with. Someone close to them. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Oh. We sat in silence for a long moment, the implications hanging heavy between us. Finally, I spoke the question that was burning in my mind. Did she have any close male friends during your relationship? Someone who was around a lot, maybe part of your friend group? Daniel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Ellie and I had a tight circle of friends. Most of them coupled up by senior year. He paused. There was one person she was particularly close with. They had an intense friendship that sometimes made me a little jealous, to be honest. Who? I pressed, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Richard's younger brother, Thomas. Tom Morgan. The room seemed to spin around me. Uncle Tom, Dad's charming, somewhat roguish younger brother who had moved to Seattle shortly after I was born. Uncle Tom, who sent lavish birthday gifts but rarely visited. Uncle Tom, who had always shown a special interest in my artistic talents, claiming they reminded him of his own abandoned dreams of being a painter. Are you all right? Daniel asked, concerned by my prolonged silence. I think my uncle is my biological father. I said the words sounding bizarre even as I spoke them. My father's brother. Daniel winced. That would explain the need for an elaborate cover story. And why they raised you as Richard's daughter without ever revealing the truth. It wasn't just about an affair, it was about who the affair was with. My whole life has been a lie wrapped in another lie. I whispered, a strange calm settling over me, despite the magnitude of this revelation. And I'm not sure I can ever trust my mother again. Daniel reached across the table briefly, touching my hand in a gesture of comfort. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Both for what you're going through and for not being the answer you were looking for. I managed a weak smile. Actually, meeting you has been incredibly valuable. Just not in the way I expected. We talked for another hour. Daniel shared stories about my mother in college, her ambitions, her intelligence, the woman she had been before, becoming Mrs. Richard Morgan. I told him about my life, my career as an illustrator, the family dynamics that now made more sense in this new harsh light. When we finally parted, he gave me his card. If you ever want to talk, or if you have more questions about your mother's past, please call. And he hesitated. I know I'm not your father, but I'd be honored to see your work sometime. From our conversation, it sounds like we share some aesthetic sensibilities, even without a genetic connection. I tucked his card into my purse, touched by the gesture. I'd like that. Vanessa was waiting anxiously in the lobby, pacing back and forth. Well, how did it go? Is he everything you hoped for in a biological father? He's not my biological father, I said flatly. He can't have children. Mom lied. Vanessa's jaw dropped. What? Then who is? I think it's Uncle Tom. Her eyes widened with shock, then narrowed in rapid calculation. That actually explains a lot. His interest in you, the way he and Dad had that huge falling out the year you were born, how Mom gets weird whenever his name comes up. Did you know? I demanded. God no, Vanessa looked genuinely horrified. I knew you weren't Dad's biological child, but I always believed Mom's story about the college boyfriend. She shook her head. This is so much worse. We returned to my apartment in stunned silence, both processing the implications. Uncle Tom Thomas Morgan lived in Seattle now, with his wife and 3 children. My half-siblings, I realized with a jolt. I'd met them at family reunions over the years, noted passing resemblances that everyone attributed to the General Morgan look. What are you going to do? Vanessa finally asked as we sat at my kitchen table, the clock showing well past midnight. I don't know yet, I admitted. Confront Mom, obviously. But after that, I'm not sure. Are you going to tell Dad? That was the million-dollar question. Learning his brother had fathered his daughter would devastate him all over again, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal from the first revelation. I need to think, I said. This isn't just about my right to know the truth anymore. This could destroy what's left of our family. Vanessa nodded solemnly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. And I mean that. She reached across the table, taking my hand. I've been a terrible sister, Brielle. Competitive, jealous, vindictive. But I want to change that. Starting now. I looked at her outstretched hand and made a decision. The cycle of secrets and lies that had poisoned our family for decades had to end. But maybe, just maybe, it could end with forgiveness rather than more destruction. I squeezed her hand. Thank you. I'm going to need all the support I can get. The next morning, I called my mother and asked her to meet me at the same cafe where we'd had our first post-Thanksgiving conversation. She agreed immediately, her voice tinged with hope that we were continuing to mend our relationship. If only she knew what was coming. The cafe was busier than the last time we'd met, filled with the Saturday morning crowd of students and young professionals. Mom was already at a corner table when I arrived, a tentative smile lighting her face as I approached. She looked better than she had in months, the dark circles under her eyes had faded, and some of the tension had left her shoulders. The irony wasn't lost on me, as my world had been collapsing, hers had been gradually reconstructing itself. Brielle, she said warmly, rising to hug me. It's good to see you. I returned the hug briefly before sitting down, steeling myself for what was to come. Thanks for meeting me. Of course. I'm always happy to spend time with you. She stirred her tea, still smiling. I've been meaning to call you actually. Your father and I are thinking of hosting a small family dinner next weekend. Nothing like Thanksgiving, just us, you and Vanessa. A fresh start. That sounds nice, I said automatically though. The idea of a fresh start built on yet another lie made my stomach turn. But before we make any plans, there's something we need to discuss. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course. What is it? I took a deep breath, deciding directness was the only approach. I met Daniel Westbrook yesterday. Mom's teacup clattered against its saucer, tea sloshing over the rim. You what? How did you? Why would you? He was giving a lecture at MIT. Vanessa helped me find him. Vanessa, Mom looked stunned. Why would she do that? Because she's trying to make amends, and because she believes, like I do, that I have a right to know the truth about my origins. I leaned forward. But here's the interesting thing, Mom. Daniel can't father children. He had mumps in college that left him sterile. A medical fact he says you were well aware of when you dated him. The color drained from her face. Brielle, I can explain, can you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you deliberately named a man who couldn't possibly contradict your story. A man who lived across the country and wasn't connected to your life anymore. I kept my voice level despite the anger churning inside me. Why would you do that, Mom? Unless the truth was worse than a random affair. She stared down at her spilled tea, silent. Is Uncle Tom my biological father? Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock and unmistakable guilt. Who told you that? No one told me. I figured it out after talking to Daniel and doing some basic math. Am I right? Mom's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, she whispered. Despite having suspected it, having the confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I sat back, momentarily speechless. It was one time, she continued, her voice barely audible. Richard was working double shifts during his residency. We barely saw each other for months. Tom would come over to keep me company. He was between jobs, had all this free time. We were both lonely, and one night, she shook her head. It was a terrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life. And when you found out you were pregnant, I was terrified. I knew it had to be Tom's Richard, and I hadn't been intimate in weeks. I considered terminating the pregnancy, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Then I thought about telling Richard the truth, but it would have destroyed him. Not just losing me, but the betrayal by his own brother. So you created a convenient fiction, I supplied. A brief reconciliation with an ex-boyfriend who happened to be sterile and couldn't contradict you. Mom nodded miserably. Daniel had moved to California. No one in our circle kept in touch with him. It seemed clean. She reached for my hand, which I pulled away. Richard agreed to raise you as his own. He loved you from the moment you were born, Brielle. That part was never a lie. What about Uncle Tom? Did he know? Yes, she admitted. He figured it out when you were born. The timing, certain features. He confronted me, and I couldn't lie to him. Richard doesn't know that Tom knows, though. We agreed it was better that way. So that's why he moved across the country, why he's been a distant figure in my life, Mom nodded. It was too painful for him to stay, too complicated, but he's always cared about you, Brielle. Those birthday gifts, the interest in your art, that's all genuine. I sat with this information, trying to process it. My biological father wasn't a stranger after all, but a man I'd known my entire life, a man who'd kept his distance to protect his brother and my family unit. It was both better and worse than what I'd imagined. Does anyone else know Grandma Morgan? Is that why she treated me differently? No, Mom shook her head firmly. Martha just knew you weren't Richard's biological child. The story about Daniel was what we told her. She struggled with it, but she never knew about Tom. No one did. Except Vanessa now. And me. Mom looked stricken. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell Richard? It would destroy him, Brielle. That was the question I'd been wrestling with since my conversation with Daniel. Did Dad, because Richard Morgan was still my dad in every way that mattered, deserve to know the full truth? Or would that knowledge only cause more pain without serving any purpose? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. I need time to think. Please, Mom begged, reaching for my hand again. This time I didn't pull away. Please consider what good could possibly come from revealing this now. Richard has been through so much already, finding out it was his brother. It would break something in him that could never be repaired. I understood her perspective, even sympathized with it. But I was tired of secrets, tired of lies that warped family relationships for decades. I'll think about it, I promised. But Mom, no more lies, not to me, not about anything. That's my condition for moving forward, whatever I decide about Dad. She nodded, wiping away tears. I promise. No more secrets. We talked for another hour, painful but necessary conversations about my childhood, about her relationship with Tom before and after, about how she'd maintained the facade for so many years. By the time we parted, I felt drained, but somehow lighter, as if the truth, however ugly, had lifted some of the weight I'd been carrying since Thanksgiving. The next week passed in a blur of intense reflection and conversations. Vanessa and I spoke daily, our relationship transforming into something I'd never thought possible, a genuine sisterhood built on honesty and mutual support. She had come clean to our parents about her financial struggles, and was now living openly with the consequences, working at Starbucks while taking night courses in financial planning. "It's actually a relief," she admitted during one of our late-night talks. "Not having to pretend anymore. Not having to compete with some imaginary standard." I understood completely. I also called Uncle Tom, a strange, emotional conversation, where neither of us directly acknowledged the truth, but somehow managed to express what needed to be said. He was coming to Boston next month, he told me. "Perhaps we could meet for lunch, just the two of us." I agreed. The hardest decision remained whether to tell Dad about Tom. I went back and forth making lists of pros and cons, trying to determine what was truly ethical versus what was kind. In the end, it was Dad himself who made the decision easier. He invited me to lunch at his favorite deli, just the two of us, something that had been a tradition when I was growing up but had fallen by the wayside in recent years. "I want you to know," he said after we'd ordered, "that I've been thinking a lot about what family really means." Oh, I managed, wondering if he somehow knew what I'd discovered. Yes. This business with Vanessa, her hiding, her struggles, pretending to be something she's not, it made me realize how much pressure we've put on appearances in this family. How much we've sacrificed authenticity for some ideal image. I nodded, throat tight with emotion. "I don't want that anymore," he continued. "I want us to be real with each other, even when it's messy. Even when it's painful." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "You are my daughter. Biology doesn't change that. These past few months have only made me more certain of it." In that moment, I made my decision. Dad already knew the most important truth, that our relationship transcended genetics. The specific identity of my biological father wouldn't strengthen that bond. It would only cause pain to a man who had loved me unconditionally my entire life. "I feel the same way," I told him, squeezing his hand. "You're my dad. That's what matters." The family dinner Mom had suggested took place the following weekend. The four of us gathered around the dining room table, the same table where Vanessa had exposed the first layer of truth at Thanksgiving. But this dinner was different. There was an authenticity to our interactions that had been missing before, a vulnerability that made even the awkward moments feel genuine. Vanessa spoke openly about her new job and classes. Mom shared her anxiety about an upcoming medical procedure she'd previously been hiding. Dad talked about his consideration of early retirement, something he'd been reluctant to discuss before. And I shared my decision to reconnect with Uncle Tom, carefully framed as wanting to know all branches of my family tree better. Mom shot me a grateful look, understanding what I wasn't saying, that I had chosen kindness over complete disclosure. As we finished dessert, a cheesecake I'd made, a deliberate echo of the one from Thanksgiving, I realized something profound. The truth had indeed set us free, but not in the way I'd expected. We didn't need every secret exposed to heal. What we needed was the commitment to move forward with greater honesty, to stop hiding behind facades, to accept each other's imperfections. The Morgan family would never be the perfect unit I'd once believed in. We were messy, complicated, flawed. We had hurt each other, and would probably do so again. But we were trying. We were talking. We were at long last being real. Later that evening, as Vanessa and I sat on the porch swing like we used to as children, she asked, "Are you going to tell him about Tom?" I shook my head. "No, not unless there's a medical reason he needs to know someday. What would it accomplish except causing more pain?" That's surprisingly compassionate, considering everything. I smiled. I've learned something from all this. There's a difference between harmful secrets and painful truths that serve no purpose. Dad knows I'm not his biological child, and he's chosen to love me anyway. That's the truth that matters." Vanessa nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I found those letters, and decided to expose everything at Thanksgiving, I thought I wanted the truth to destroy our family. I was so angry, so jealous of what I saw as your perfect relationship with Mom and Dad. And now I understand that the truth can heal as well as hurt. It depends on the spirit in which it's revealed." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Vanessa finally asked. "Yes," I said, surprised to find I truly believed it. "Different than before, but okay. Maybe even better." And as the spring breeze rustled through the newly budded trees, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. The journey wasn't over. I still had lunch with Uncle Tom to navigate relationships, to rebuild a new understanding of myself, to integrate. But for the first time in months, I was looking forward rather than backward, focused on creating rather than discovering. In the end, family wasn't defined by blood or by perfect facades. It was defined by choice, the daily choice to love, to forgive, to speak truth when necessary, and to practice kindness always. My sister had said, "Go find another table, adopted kids aren't allowed." But what I'd found instead was a deeper understanding of what makes a real family, not perfect truths, but perfect acceptance of our imperfect selves. Hey everyone, I hope my story resonated with you in some way. Family secrets can be devastating, but they can also lead to unexpected growth and healing when handled with honesty and compassion. If you've experienced something similar, or have thoughts about how you would have handled my situation, please share in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found value in my journey, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that family is ultimately about choice, not just blood. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, but getting better. I'm grateful for this community where we can learn these life lessons together.